Introduction to Ethics, Measuring Morality. Now, ethics and morality are two very related words, but they actually describe different things. Now, ethical conflicts abound. Quite a few years ago, Cornell President Frank Rhodes was speaking to the business school, and he wanted to let them know that they were introducing a business ethics course. And he did not expect to get all this pushback from the students. Well, whose ethics? What are you going to use? Why should we believe that ethic? To them, ethics was very relative. So, a course in business ethics, what did that really mean? They didn't want such a thing. In our country, particularly around the world, abortion, we have same-sex marriage, capital punishment. Is someone a freedom fighter or a terrorist? It depends on where you are at the time and what's been done. Embryonic stem cell research. Now, what this is about, I think back in the early 2000s is when it was, we began being able to isolate embryonic stem cells from an embryo. When an embryo is about 14 days along, it's called a blastocyst. And it's got an outer ring of cells, and then it has what's called a very small inner cell mass. The inner cell mass is what actually becomes the fetus or baby. Those outer cells don't become anything useful in that respect. And so the cells of that inner cell mass can become any cell or tissue in the body, anything. And the cell became a focus of research to find out how can we manipulate these cells to form tissues that patients might need, that it's dying or it needs repairing, and we can produce tissue for that. And in the state of Texas, scientists wanted to create a embryonic stem cell research laboratory. Didn't matter what university it was associated with, probably associated with all Texas public universities. And there was a hearing about that in the Texas Senate, and it was sent to a committee and to be considered there. And at those Texas Senate committees, people are allowed to come testify. And I was doing something else with our research team at Probe, and I got this email, text message, can't remember which it was, phone call, from Texas Right to Life. They wanted to bring in a specialist from California who specialized in this sort of thing, but he suddenly wasn't available. So they just started scouring scientists, Texas stem cell research, and I had already written about it, and they found me. So they asked if I would come testify. I said, sure. So when it came the day for the committee hearing, the place was packed out, and they had far more testifiers than they could possibly fit in. Usually every testifier would get 2 minutes. But they said, we don't have time for that. There's too many people here. So each side was to pick out 2 individuals who would give a 5-minute testimony as opposed to 2. And then everybody else would get 1 minute. So I got selected to be one of the 5-minute testifiers. So suddenly my testimony had to expand from 2 minutes to 5. And the woman who was in charge of legislation for Texas Right to Life, young lady, she started handing me different papers and this and that. Why don't you try this? Talk about this. Oh, okay. I had maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes to try to arrange something. And my time came, and I gave my testimony, and apparently, as we found out later, it was very influential with the committee because the committee turned down the request. So it never went to the full Texas Senate. But all because of embryonic stem cell research. And I've been connected to Texas Right to Life ever since. So, well, you even find these things in school, right? Ethical conflicts, cheating. If you use any kind of AI chat GPT to write a paper, you're cheating. Plagiarism, copying what somebody else did. Lying. Nobody in here would ever lie, right? Ever. No. Never have, right? None of you ever lied, right? Nobody's answering affirmative to that. Okay. I have, so I... Unexcused absence. Talking out of turn. Fighting. This is mostly in public schools, okay? Swearing, yeah.
Definitely in public schools.
Yeah. Yeah, you'd get in trouble if you did that here. Somebody would hear you and report you to higher authorities. Now, private schools out of uniform, but that's not such a big deal. So we need to ask the question now, what is ethics? Well, this was on your quiz. The Greek word ethos means what ought to be. It's the study of standards of conduct and moral judgment. Now, usually this is in the context of other people. Or the system or code of morals of a particular philosopher, religion, or group. And again, it's how the group interacts, or how the philosopher thinks people ought to interact. Now, the example we use here is a fleet of ships sailing in formation. And a couple of things have to be operating in order for this to be done well. First, collectively, the ships need to cooperate to keep from running into each other. So they have to be able to communicate with each other. And so there needs to be cooperation to make sure they don't run into each other. Individually, each ship needs to remain in good repair so it can stay on that course, whatever it is, and not run into others. And it has to know where the fleet is going. What's the destination? Whatever course we're on, why are we on that course? Where is the fleet going? Now, this applies to ethics and morality. We need to be concerned with three things. First, with fair play and harmony between individuals. That technically is what ethics is. So that's the ships being able to cooperate with each other. That's ethics. Second, what might be called tidying up or harmonizing the thing inside each individual, morality, that's making sure each of the ships is in proper working order so they can cooperate and stay on course. And third, with the general purpose of human life as a whole, what man was made for, what course the whole fleet ought to be on. So ethics is fair play and harmony between individuals. Morality is the thing inside each individual. So, now we all have a sense of ethics. You hear phrases like, you promised, that's not fair. We'll get to C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity, in a little bit. Are ethics relative, depending upon the situation? Or are they absolute under all situations? Ought and should. It's everywhere. Students want to know why. Anybody want to ask us why we have a final exam?
To make sure we know the information.
Yeah, make sure you learn something this semester. But we're giving you a big head start with that little sheet.
Thank you.
Now we're going to talk about several systems of ethics here. The first one is the natural ethic, and this is from a poet. It may make sense to you, may not. I don't like poetry myself, so it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me, but all nature is but art, unknown to you or thee. All chance, direction which thou canst not see. All discord, harmony not understood. And all partial evil, universal good. And spite of pride in erring reason's spite. One truth is clear, whatever is right. That last sentence sums up the natural ethic. Oughts are simply derived from what is. How are people already interacting with each other? That's how it ought to be. Whatever is ethically right is related in some way to what is materially true. Now, what's materially true here is how people are already interacting. There's no standard out there for anyone to live up to. The science of behaviorism, they reduced our mind to chemical interactions. And B.F. Skinner, one of the behaviorists early in the 20th century, talked about being able to, if he could set up completely the environment for an individual, he would be able to form that individual into whatever he wanted them to be. In his mind, genetics didn't play a role at all. It was all your environment that you're raised in, and we can manipulate that. So the world acts on us, not us on the world. Understand that? Okay. Now, a critique. It's kind of an old male line there. He doesn't look so healthy. First of all, there's no human responsibility. If whatever is right, then if somebody robs a bank, they say, well, you know, that's how I was raised. I don't know anything else, and they're not held responsible for what they did. There's also no true good or evil. Humanness is destroyed if practiced consistently. What do you think that means? Why? Humanness is destroyed if practiced consistently. Andrew, any ideas what that means? Well, if no one is held responsible for whatever they might do, whether it was harming someone, stealing something, cheating on their spouse, not responsible for that, how would that destroy humanness?
It removes all sensitivity from us?
All sensitivity, right? And we might punish someone or put them in prison because they provide a danger for anyone, including whoever puts them in prison. So we want to keep myself and everybody else free of that interruption, but they're not responsible for what they did. How long would they stay in prison? Probably. Yeah, not very long. Well, humanness is destroyed here because, especially if you practice it consistently, there's just not, we're all, in a sense, looking to blame someone for what goes wrong, and we all want to give someone credit for what they do right. But that would be destroyed. That's what humans do. But in this situation, that would never happen. There's no reason to commend somebody. It was just their environmentally constructed brain that did it. And basically, you really can't live this way. Any human is going to want to find ways to hold someone accountable, to give somebody credit. In another presentation, I'll quote the famous atheist Richard Dawkins, at one time he was promoting one of his new books. He was in America. He was in New York City, I think, or maybe in Washington, D.C. When you do that, you read a portion of your book and you answer some questions, then you sign the books the people buy. And he was asked about this very issue, that if humans are truly autonomous, meaning there's nobody to rein us in, we are who we are, there's no God, there's no moral law of any kind. And he basically asked, but he says he wants to receive, he's there hawking his book, he wants to receive credit for what he did. And the question is simply asked, well, isn't that kind of against your worldview here? Because you're wanting credit for what you did. You want to earn money for it. You want people to sign the book. You want to sign people's books. Well, he said, I guess it sort of is, and the guy kind of pushed it further, and he said, well, yeah, but if we don't, life would become intolerable. No credit ever, no responsibility ever. You really can't live this way. And even Richard Dawkins, the famous atheist, knew that. So now let's move on to the consensus ethic. And here it's just whatever a cultural group approves of is right, whatever that might be. And the opinion poll rules, we are already under that kind of influence. Because every time there's an election, all kinds of different organizations start running opinion polls, and they start asking, certain number, 500,000 individuals, about which candidate they're going to vote for, what issue is most important to you. And those opinion polls are used to give you a general sense of what the culture is approving of. It's a consensus ethic. The greatest good for the greatest number. Sometimes that doesn't work out so well for those who aren't among the greatest number. But that might not be good for others. Good is whatever the majority agrees on. Now, sometimes after an election, whoever was elected president or to the Senate or the House of Representatives or statewide offices, there's plenty of people who didn't like the results of the election, but they're not the majority, unless they didn't vote. So, critique. Can you really define anything as good? You having a hard time following the outline? Okay. Could the majority be wrong? Yeah. I mentioned Papua New Guinea. When missionaries first arrived there, cannibalism was an accepted practice. But there was a rule in place. You could, quote unquote, eat somebody from a different tribe, but you weren't supposed to eat somebody from your own tribe. But the majority, cannibalism is good. Yeah, Daniel?
There was a quote, I don't know who said it, but I think it applies to this. It is something like, right is always right even if no one is doing it, and wrong is always wrong even if everyone is doing it.
Yep,
So.
yeah. Cool.
Is Papua New Guinea like a bunch of tribes or something?
No, it's an island in the Indonesia area.
Oh.
So, Southeast Asia. So, north of Australia and basically south of Vietnam and Thailand, Cambodia. knowing what people do doesn't mean that they should. People might agree that this is the right thing, but it doesn't mean that it actually is. That's really what we've been saying here already. People who propose this enjoy the status quo. They want things to remain as they are. If it's going to change, it'll change because the majority wants to make a change. But ordinarily, can anybody tell me what status quo means? Faith? No? Andrew? No? Amara? No? Cole? Daniel? No? So,
What?
nobody knows what status quo means.
That's okay. Tell them.
It's the way things are. The way things already are. So people with the consensus ethic want things to stay the way they are. Don't change anything unless the majority speaks up in a way that makes it obvious. And in 1859, slavery was acceptable and abortion was not. It's completely reversed today. So the consensus ethic can dramatically change. 1859 was the year of what's called the Dred Scott decision by the U.S. Supreme Court. And Dred Scott was a escaped slave, and his previous owners went to court to force him to come back. And the Supreme Court ruled that he actually was the property of his previous owners, and he had to go return. So they approved of slavery. Let's just say Abraham Lincoln didn't like that decision very much. So this is C.S. Lewis here. Those who prefer this ethical foundation must face one very dangerous fact. If there is no standard by which society can be judged and held accountable, then society becomes the judge. When that happens, no one is safe. Minorities, the unborn, the elderly, the handicapped, and perhaps even the blonde-headed or the left-handed. Let's get rid of all those blonde-haired people. Let's get rid of all the left-handers. They write weird. My dad was left-handed. Watching him write was torturous. Okay. Arbitrary ethic, or the power ethic. Basically here we're saying might makes right. If you have the power, then you can control a society. An individual or elite sets values and maintains them by force. Marxism said that what became the Communist Party decides and enforces what is right. In the Soviet Union of the past, that was handled by an organization called the Politburo. And it was a group of only 12 individuals. And they voted on what was right and what was wrong. And it held the power of law of the land everywhere. And so this wasn't one individual, but like I said, the Communist Party decided. Then you have people like Hitler, Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot, Saddam Hussein. Anybody know who Mao was?
Mao Zedong.
Mao Zedong, yeah.
Yeah, communist leader of China.
Communist leader of China. He led the revolution that made China communist. Pol Pot.
Yeah.
He was in Cambodia, and he turned Cambodia into a communist state. Saddam Hussein? Iran. No. Iraq. He was the dictator of Iraq for years and years, and the U.S. finally dethroned him and actually tried him and put him to death. Obviously, Hitler, Stalin, you know who those are, right? Stalin?
Russia. Or
Yeah.
Soviet Union.
Soviet Union, when?
That was like
40s?
Yeah, World War II.
Yeah, World War II.
Now, technically, he had a Politburo that technically decided things, but the Politburo he had stocked with his own supporters. And so Stalin technically ruled with an iron hand. Now, this is a picture of Hitler. I'm going to offer a critique here. You've probably heard the phrase that absolute power corrupts absolutely. That's basically what this one is. Absolute power is corrupting. People get carried away with the power that they have. And if there's nobody there who can rein them in, then you have things like the Holocaust of World War II. 6.5 million Jews and about 6 million others, gypsies and other minorities, handicapped individuals, Hitler had put to death. And by the way, some of the laws he put into effect to begin accommodating that were borrowed from laws in U.S. states. About 30-something states had laws prohibiting certain individuals to reproduce, and they were involuntarily sterilized, meaning they could no longer reproduce, and it was determined by the state that they shouldn't be able to reproduce. So some of his first laws he borrowed from the U.S. And it wasn't until 1969 the last one of those laws was finally repealed. So it wasn't as widespread as Hitler was, but thousands of individuals were sterilized without their permission. Individual rights disappear. In Rome, the only people that had rights were Roman citizens. Now, the Apostle Paul was born a Roman citizen, but nobody really realized that when he went back to Jerusalem, and the Pharisees and the scribes, so forth, wanted to turn him over to the Romans to be punished, but then the Roman leader found out he was a Roman citizen, and that changed everything. Suddenly, and he appealed to Caesar, and that's how he ended up going to Rome. When a Roman citizen appeals to Caesar, you can't do anything to him. They have to appear before Caesar. And that gave Paul the opportunity to share the gospel while he was in prison in Rome and while he was in prison in Jerusalem. So this is related to your essay question this week. Abortion is legal, but is it moral? When you say something is moral, what you're basically saying is that it's a good thing. One of you kind of used that improperly, and it should have been, well, abortion is a moral issue, but it's not moral. Okay? And it presupposes great trust in those who govern. Now, sometimes there wasn't great trust. Nobody in the Soviet Union trusted the Politburo. Not many people in Germany trusted Hitler. Some did. A lot did, actually. Almost all the army did. They would do whatever he told them to do. And that was their downfall. Hitler was not a very good military strategist. So, now the true absolute ethic or transcendence. We all have internal deficiencies, and conflict needs an objective standard. Now, this obviously presupposes that God exists and has revealed these standards. The creator of man and nature knows how we work best. So when you look at something like the Ten Commandments, I mean, many of them are don't. Don't do this, don't do that. But it also many times in the Old Testament, if you do this or don't do that, it will go well with you, is a phrase that's repeated throughout the Pentateuch, first 5 books of the Bible. And what that simply means is that God is simply telling us how we ought to act because he knows how we would work best. And it's best for you if you do this or don't do that. It's best for you if you do this or don't do that. No. There is a fire station down the street here on 15th. So sometimes people have seen the Ten Commandments as just all these restrictions on what we can and can't do. But really, it's God showing us how we as humans work best. I'm going to illustrate this here. Some things are true whether you believe in them or not. Now, the clip I'm going to show you comes from the film. I'm going to make sure this is up all the way. Okay. City of Angels. And Nicolas Cage plays an angel that would actually appear to people before they died and helped guide them to heaven. And he leaves the room of someone who just died, and he comes across this heart surgeon, played by Meg Ryan, and they have this little conversation.
I was holding his heart in my hand when he died.
And he wasn't alone.
Yes, he was.
People die.
Not on my table.
People die when their bodies give out.
It's my job to keep their bodies from giving out. Or what am I doing here?
It wasn't your fault, Maggie.
I wanted him to live.
He is living. Just not the way you think.
I don't believe in that.
Some things are true whether you believe in them or not.
You said it was called City of Angels?
City of Angels, yeah. Yeah, and Nicolas Cage, the angel, ends up falling in love with Meg Ryan, and he requests permission to no longer be an angel and become a human who will die. Very weird.
Yeah, it
Needless
is.
to say, this is not a biblical movie.
Yes.
But it
just
has
wanted to
that
know
great
what it was.
line in it.
Okay. So, critique of the true absolute. Well, some things are right despite circumstances, and a true moral dilemma means there's two options. Each one of them has a good aspect to it and a bad aspect to it. A good example during World War II of individuals, particularly in Belgium, who were hiding Jews from the Nazis. The Nazi soldiers would come around and they would ask, do you have any Jews living in your home? Now, if they told the truth, that's bad for the Jews in the home, because they would be taken. And also the people who were housing them would likely face punishment as well. And if they said no, well, they just lied. But the people, now say they were up in an attic that they could let the Nazis in, walk around downstairs, upstairs, didn't know there was an attic, and would never discover them, and they'd leave and never come back. So despite the circumstances, some things are just always right. When they lied, that was wrong. It was still sin. But they saved the people who were inside. Provides a basis for conviction that's unchanging. It's not really a critique, but it just simply states a reality. Now, to some, the fact that it's unchanging could be seen as a problem. I'd rather some of this be able to change. No matter how you look at it, lying is still a sin. Thou shalt not lie. Right? Wish they could change that. It does provide a motive for fighting evil. Evil is what's wrong. And the true absolute does provide a motive for fighting against that. Provides opportunity for social change. Fortunately, abortion is no longer legal throughout the land. It's left up to the states. And fortunately, in the state of Texas, it was voted to be illegal. But there's still quite a controversy taking place because individuals in the state of Texas are able to purchase the abortion pill from outside, the vendors who are outside of Texas. And the state of Texas is trying to find ways to determine who those vendors are, and is there some way they can hold them accountable or find out who they sent those pills to be able to confiscate them before a baby is killed. Well, how do you know? God told you. It presupposes that God exists. Moral dilemma here: who makes the rules? Prior to the 1800s in the U.S., God made the rules. There was transcendent truth in place. Truth is out there beyond ourselves. It's not something we determine on our own. We have to be told. Truth, the word truth, is with a capital T. When we rely on human reason, however, to make the rules, science in some ways can tell us what's true and what's not, but only in a scientific sense. For instance, with the embryonic stem cell research, scientists were able to tell us what we can do, but they weren't the ones to be telling us what we should do. That's an ethical question, and they were not qualified to do that. Truth comes from man himself, or humans themselves. Naturalism rules, and therefore truth is with a small t. People say that might be true for you, but it's not true for me. That's true with a small t. You have your own, people have their own personal truths, they like to think. So essentially there is no truth in this context when you rely upon human reason. Why do human ethics fail? Well, science is limited. Science, as I just said, science can tell us what is, but not what we ought to do. How-tos, but not ought-tos. Scientists are not trained that way. And that's one of the points I made in my testimony, is that these scientists should not be telling us what we should do. They can tell us what we can do, but they have no training to tell us what we ought to do. Relativism is ultimately self-contradictory. Saying there is no absolute is itself an absolute statement. Get it? Okay. Well, our Christian ethical absolutes are based on the authority of the Creator. He made us. He knows how we work. The absolute standard is God. Man is a moral being in God's image, and God's moral revelation has intrinsic value. I mean, it has value in and of itself because God provided it. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, trust in the Lord with all your heart, and how's the rest of the verse go? Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge Him, and He'll make your path straight. It's a good verse to memorize. Scripture then also becomes morally authoritative. Law and love are harmonized. God's moral revelation is for our benefit. They are timeless with historical continuity. Proverbs 5:21, for your ways are in full view of the Lord, and He examines all your paths. Nothing is hidden from God. You may try to sneak something that your parents might not know about, but God knows. Can't fool Him. Proverbs 27:2, let someone else praise you and not your own mouth, an outsider and not your own lips. When someone criticizes you, it's very tempting to defend yourself, which in a way is praising yourself. Rather, if somebody else is in the room who's your friend, let them speak up for you, not yourself. True Christian morality deals with intentions. We see that in the Sermon on the Mount, as well as actions. Seeks the glory of God instead of pleasure and self-gratification, and encourages service to others rather than serving self. God alone knows all the goals, determines all morality, and allows us to quote-unquote play the game. But he does not allow us to make the rules. Modern man, seemingly loose from such transcendent restrictions, has chosen to make up his own. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment? And he said to them, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. This is the greatest and foremost commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no other commandment greater than these. Also, that involves the 10 commandments are not greater than those. The two greatest commandments are all about love. Love God, love your neighbor. There's no restrictions there. It's just love. By the way, when I was a new believer, in some, I think it's in Matthew or maybe it's in Luke's gospel, that when Jesus says this, they leave out with all your mind. But in the original Hebrew, when you go back to Deuteronomy 6, where you read this, it's just heart, soul, and strength. And I became concerned. Did Mark add something? Or did Jesus add something here? What's going on here? Well, the Greek word for heart, the Hebrew word for heart also includes mind. So what gets quoted in the New Testament is the Greek Old Testament. And so when that was translated from Hebrew into Greek, they had to add the phrase with all your mind to make sure the entire meaning was used, was there. So yeah, Jesus didn't do anything untoward. Questions, comments, complaints?